Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Convery, the podcast where we bring you inspiring stories and conversations with remarkable individuals. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down and introducing you to a true advocate for children's rights, an esteemed lawyer and the author of the New York Times Bestseller, Hope's Boy by Andrew Bridge. Andrew's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. From growing up in foster care from 6 to 18 to defying the odds and earning scholarships to Wesleyan and Harvard Law School, Andrew has transformed adversity into advocacy. As a children's rights lawyer, Andrew has dedicated his life to defending the rights of the most vulnerable among us. The author of Hope's Boy, a New York Times, Los Angeles Times Publishers Weekly Bestseller, and Washington Post Best Book of the Year, Andrew shares a deeply personal and heart-wrenching story of his life. From the love he shared with his mother to the challenges of foster care and the resilience that propelled him to become a Fulbright Scholar. So this is Coffee with Convery, and I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, the inspiring children's rights lawyer and author, Andrew Bridge. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. And that's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so great to meet you and have an opportunity to talk to you and share some of your thoughts and stories with the audience. So maybe what I usually do is just ask a few rapid fire questions just to kind of get a look into who Andrew is, and then we'll jump into your story. So what are your pronouns?
He, him.
He, him. And what's your superpower?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think I'd like to think of myself as patient
Patient.
and
That's
and uh, and I would hope that I'm a good listener.
awesome. Well, those are great superpowers to have. This one I always throw in there. I think it's a little fun just to find out what people's favorite smell is.
Oh, limes. I love limes.
Limes. Citrus. Citrus, yes.
Citrus.
Fresh,
Uh,
fresh. Um, Thinking about some of the things that you've heard or been complimented on, what is the best compliment you have ever received?
I think it was from a mom in South LA.
Hmm.
She had lost her kids, lived in a tiny apartment, and I sat with her in a living room that had really nothing there. And at the end of it, she said, "You listened to me," and she thanked me. And the idea that a mom had been through so much like that,
Hmm.
and so few people had really given her any sort of level of trust and that sort of thing, that just for a moment that she felt that was a very, very powerful compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thinking about go-to snacks. What is your go-to snack?
Oh, my go-to snack. What's my go-to snack? Oh, I'm just addicted to protein bars. I love protein bars. I
Protein
want
bars, that's pretty healthy. That's not like a
to.
guilty pleasure. That's a good one.
Well, if you look at what's in a protein bar, sometimes there's
Okay.
not a lot of protein. That's true. I think I'm going more for the chocolate covering of the protein bar than the protein bar itself.
I
So
gotcha. I gotcha. There you go. As long as you don't just peel off the chocolate, that's it.
exactly.
Um, High school doesn't matter, university. What was your favorite subject?
English.
English.
I had a not so much for the English part of it, but because I had a teacher who, she didn't have any idea that I grew up in foster care. I kept that a dark secret,
Okay.
and I was a very shy kid. But she took the time to 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 teach me poetry. She took the time to teach me how to write a proper sentence. And even though I went back to a foster family every night, um, she was there with me, and she did her job, and she was dependable, and she was kind, and so English. And
English.
I love books because of her.
Yeah, it's so interesting how much a teacher can really impact your life, right? With that as well. Um,
Yeah, she could be tough as nails. Now, so I'm not saying she was
yeah.
fine with ripping into an essay, but she did it with kindness, and it may not have felt the best all the time, but if Mrs. Daly's out there, hello, Mrs. Daly. Still can't call her by her first name.
I
So
know. I still can't either. Like, I don't know. I think it's something about growing up in that era where you still do. Still, I even still call my neighbors, my old neighbors by their
yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. But
Mr.
yeah,
Mrs.
it's I don't know, it's a sign of respect, I think. Thinking of first jobs, what was your very first job?
My very first job was in high school. My very first job was I was a a bag boy. I bagged groceries.
Okay.
Um, it was a great job. I loved just what it paid well, which was great. But apart from that, I really enjoyed just interacting with people and those little conversations with folks, getting them out to their car and that sort of thing. Was just it was a good job for a kid. It was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great skills to gain and confidence and all the others, communication.
Yeah.
If you This is the last one, and then I promise we'll jump into things. But if you had to describe yourself in one word, what would you pick?
Hopeful.
Hopeful. All right, awesome. All right, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on your memoir, Hope's Boy. Growing up in foster care from, I believe, age 6 to 18 must have been incredibly challenging. Can you take us, the audience, back to where it all began for you?
Sure. Um, I lived with a single mom. My mom didn't graduate from high school or college. She herself had actually grown up very poor. She was from Colorado. She'd gone in and out of girls' homes when she was a child. My father, my father pretty much abandoned us.
Right.
There was a divorce, but I I think the deal between them, she never said it, but I think the deal was he was pretty violent. And I think the deal was you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone.
Hmm.
And that's what they did. And that was a good thing. My father was a very violent man. And I don't have a relationship with, he's passed away. I never had a relationship with him as a child. In any event, so it was mom and me, Hope, my mom. And I guess it was around first grade, second half of first grade. I noticed that mom began to act a little different. Mom began to be much more concerned about things, began to talk about people from the county coming and getting me. Um, our world just began to get smaller. She began to be very, very protective of me. And then that rapidly increased. Suddenly it just spiraled. And so in a matter of months, it went from people from the county coming to a pack of men who were out there hunting for me. And so the drapes were closed and she lost her job. She went to beauty school. She lost her job. We were thrown out of apartments. We lived in the backs of garages. We lived in people's homes if the couple took us in. And she developed paranoid schizophrenia. And
Wow.
so at that time, she didn't know that she was a young woman just starting her psychotic breaks, and I didn't know that I was a little boy watching his mom lose her mind.
Right.
And so one day, the county did come. It wasn't the pack of men; it was the county, and they ripped me from her arms uh, on the street with a sheriff's deputy. I was thrown into a car and driven to a place called McLaren Hall. McLaren was an abandoned polio hospital, so filled with tunnels and corridors and basements. And the county had bought it to put foster children in because it had a lot of beds.
Right.
And the original intent was this was the place where foster children were going to go because they had been going to juvenile hall. And the problem was when you mixed kids who'd been adjudicated with very young children who'd been taken in foster care, that wasn't a good combination. In addition, when you put kids who've been taken into foster care under the responsibility of probation, that meant probation officers, armed people, that sort of thing. So the plan was a separate facility. That didn't work. The facility was immediately surrounded by, a 15-foot fence with barbed wire. It had floodlights that came on at night, and of course they didn't keep the population separate. And so immediately they began to just recreate the same thing. So you had very young kids like myself, age 6, age 7, there with adolescents who could be violent, who in some cases committed felonies. And so it was a
Wow.
chaotic, violent place. Spent a year there. And then right before my 8th birthday, I was placed in a foster home. And I would say, the best thing about that foster home was that it was permanent. And so one of the things one of the worst things that happens to kids, and I think we as adults, if we think about it for a moment, is being moved all the time.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to adults, I say, just imagine, over the last 5 years, if I said you were going to have to move 5 times, and what that would do to your life, and what that would do to your friends, and how you would feel as an adult. And that's the thing that I didn't have to go through because I stayed with that foster family. Now, it wasn't a great foster family, to say. It wasn't a foster family that often particularly wanted to keep me. As a matter of fact, it was a foster family that regularly threatened to send me back to that very facility, McLaren, where I'd come from. But it was a foster family that I stayed with. And so I went to a great high school. I was just talking about my English teacher, Mrs. Daly. And I had a lot of other really, really great adults in my life. And ones who were there, there were a couple of social workers who were consistent. And, as I said, they did their job. They came back when they were supposed to. And they did what they were supposed to. Sometimes I talk about, by the time I reached my senior year, I was applying to colleges. The way I found out to apply to colleges was I just rode my bike to the mall. I picked up one of those old guides. Now people don't even recognize these things because they're all online. They used to have these massive books for folks that aren't remembering, and you'd have to buy it about 3 inches thick.
Yeah.
And you'd go in the back and there'd be an index of schools. Now, this doesn't exist anymore, but that's the way we did it back in the dark ages. And you'd look at your scores and your grades, and there was an index, and you just pick schools. And so I just picked, I think it was 5 schools, and just randomly applied.
Wow.
And so I got in, and I was given a full scholarship to Wesleyan in Connecticut, which is a great school. I was very lucky.
Yeah.
And then, I left foster care. The first time I saw school, I didn't go on that college tour. The first time I saw school was getting off that bus in Middletown, Connecticut, and having someone from the school walk up to me and say, "Hi, I'm from Wesleyan," and driving up the hill.
Interesting. Because a lot of our listeners here are at that age where they're picking schools or thinking about schools or at school, but I too remember the books. So
Yeah.
But for you too, to just see it for the first time, where many students are traveling around looking at schools, you really saw it for the first time stepping off the bus, which must have been an interesting experience for you.
Sometimes I think about it. I think, gosh, I think I was brave as as a kid, as a little young kid that I am now. I just, I saved up my money from that bagging groceries
Yep.
and to get on that plane and landed in LaGuardia, New York. Never having, well, having been on a plane once before, but never having been in New York and taking the bus from LaGuardia into Middletown, Connecticut. And I don't know how I did all that,
Yeah.
with literally everything in a suitcase, because I had to take everything, right?
Right.
There's really no going back with that sort of stuff where I was,
Right.
and showing up. And it wasn't always easy, and I don't think, I think I share this with people in college and thinking about college now. It's not always easy. It's hard, and you're figuring things out,
Yep.
and you don't quite know where to go. And so uh, I get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing a little insights there of your growing up. And, now as a published author, I'm curious, what role do you believe storytelling, plays in advocating for children's rights, and how can narratives like yours influence broader social awareness and policy changes?
Yeah, so certainly, in my first book, I, I'd like to think that it did that. I like to think that it reminded folks, on a policy level and in academic institutions and just everyday folks that never thought about what happens to kids, that terrible things happen to, that families fall apart. Where do they go? And so the idea that someone who's never had any experience in foster care, I get letters and or something, get a note or something, and those were the things that meant the best. What
Hmm.
were the most important was they said, I didn't know anything about this, and they might say, but it reminded me about something that happened to me as a kid, because there was a rough patch.
Right.
you know, I lost my mom, or my mom got sick, or my dad went away, or I just was lonely. And so those really meant the most. Um, I will say, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, it's my second book that's coming out in September, which is really exciting. And that's much more what that's about is the start of how I became someone who does work for kids. So earlier I mentioned that my first year in foster care was at a big facility,
Right.
chaotic facility called Leonard. My The way my start in doing children's rights, it began by, interestingly, and by just pure coincidence, um, going back and representing children in another very similar facility in Alabama,
Okay.
and sitting down with kids who are living behind a fence, and listening to their stories and learning about their parents, listening to things that they missed. When they talk, they talk about very ordinary things. They talk about their bedroom at home. They talk about walking to school. They talk about things when life was different, and going back. And so, in any event, that experience grew, and it became very clear that this facility needed to close. There were a lot of things going on with these kids that shouldn't be going on, and so it was a federal trial. And I won't be too much of a spoiler, but it was my first time in federal court, my first time putting a boy on a witness stand, and learning how to ask him questions without absolutely just ripping him to shreds, because that's what's going to happen, or hoping that the state didn't, that the state assistant attorney general didn't rip this 13-year-old into shreds. And well, I will say it, and having that facility close and doing something good for those kids. So that's what it's called, the child catcher.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about it. So
Oh, good. Good. Well, we'll be looking for that. It comes out in September.
comes out in September, and it'll be available before that. And so it's been long in coming. It was a little challenging doing this book, because but I spent a lot of time on it, but also, And sometimes there have been really good things that have happened in my life, and sometimes there have just been rough patches. And sure enough, right as I was finishing this book during COVID and about to hit the road, in terms of getting my publisher all lined up, I just happened to be diagnosed with cancer. And so I ended up finishing the remainder of it while I was undergoing cancer treatment. I'm over that now, and it's just really exciting to know that this is a book that I think young people want to read about because it
Okay.
involves young people, and also other folks, because I think people care about what happens with these. And
Yeah.
like I say, I think it's a good story.
Yeah.
It was a pretty tough. I was a very young lawyer, 27, 26 years old, and up against the state of Alabama. And when Alabama wants to be mean, it knows how to be mean.
I
It's pretty
bet.
intimidating.
I
Yeah,
bet. Well,
with all
we'll
due
look.
respect.
Yeah, no, of course, of course. What's interesting to me too is you were saying how the letters and some of the things you get from people, and thinking about the book, well, Hope's Boy as well right now. What do you hear from some of the readers? Does this book help them identify what happened to them, or have you gotten letters where the impact on the readers has been something that's been significant? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, what there are a couple things that come to mind. Sometimes I get a letter that says that someone actually wanted to do something,
Yep.
and so they volunteered, and they really got involved. They jumped some just jumped all in, and they're doing policy and that sort of stuff,
Good.
or sitting down with kids and that sort of thing. Um, the other thing though is just to get a letter from particularly a young person, or even an adult who says, you know, this just reminded me of me, even though we have very different stories. And it I felt myself in that book. And that's
Yeah.
just that's just a what a feeling.
Yeah,
That's just um that's why you write a book.
that's right.
That's why you
Yeah,
write a book.
people want to feel something, they want to identify and understand and take action, like some of the people you've said. Like, that's incredible. People have read it and actually said, I'm going to do something about this as well, who may not have experienced but also wants to get involved. And that's wonderful. I wanted to ask you, thinking about the audience again here, and a lot of young listeners, you were a Fulbright Scholar. You earned scholarships to Wesleyan and Harvard Law School, which is remarkable achievements, by the way. Um, Thinking about that academic journey and education, how has that helped you and shaped your overall approach to, well, life and work by going through that?
So I guess what I first want to say is that when it comes to school, there's successes in all sorts of different ways, and that's really important to me. So not everybody's got to go to Harvard Law School, and I would advise that not everybody go to Harvard Law School. Um, I, I, I'd say for me, in a lot of ways, sure, it gave me a career.
Right.
And I feel hugely fortunate and just lucky to have those things. But it also, and I think this is where it goes back to, it doesn't matter what the name of the school is. It gave me a sense of self
Hmm.
and a sense of who I was and a sense of security at the time. But also, it gave me a sense that there's something ahead.
Interesting.
That there are good things ahead, despite what you may have come from, despite how hard it may have been. Maybe you're a kid, and I sit down and talk with kids. Maybe a kid who didn't get all that praise in high school.
Hmm.
Teachers just they weren't there for you, but you went ahead anyway. And that's where those are the kids which are so wonderful to sit with, because those are the kids that where they see there are good things ahead, there are possibilities, And that's what's gotten me through, and that's what I really hope so much for kids who are in school.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great building block for life too, right? I think that's something I always tell young people, that it's sometimes where you find, like, discover yourself and you figure out things, and it's transformative. So yeah, so it's a great opportunity for people to still pursue that education and to still think about it. As a children's rights lawyer, you have likely faced triumphs and setbacks. How do you cope with the emotional toll of your work, and what keeps you motivated to continue advocating for children despite some of those challenges?
Yes, so yeah, it's tough work, you know. It's I give an example. It's I regularly read kids' files. So these are case files where a child is in the juvenile justice system or in the foster care system or in the mental health system, and I'm literally reading their social history, where they came from, who their parents were, who their family are, and then what happened once they entered care, once they became in the system.
Hmm.
And and sometimes it's extremely hard to read, about a 16-year-old who entered care when they were 6 and they've been moved 8 times. Um, they've run away. There's nothing. This system is really not giving them anything,
Mm.
not giving them what it promised, and that was a home. And that's the hardest thing. Um, but on the other hand, what I'd say is, that's also where I get a lot of inspiration.
Yeah,
That's where, you know that the child that I just talked about is very different from my experience in foster care. Um, and it probably is a very different kid, and it is a very different kid than I was. Um, but it's the chance to do something for that kid that even in foster care, where I mean, it's kind of a low bar, I will admit, but where I did okay in foster care, for the kid that isn't, the chance to reach out, that means the world.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine it's changing lives, people's lives. It's pretty big. So thinking too about some of our listeners, and I find obviously your situation is really inspiring, of what you've created and done for yourself. Thinking about maybe someone who's listening who wants to, let's say, pursue a career in law. Um, any advice or thoughts around what to think about there? And I mean, obviously, law is a big career,
Sure.
and there's different dimensions to law, but just any like general advice for someone who's thinking, hey, this might be something I want to do.
So, my first thing, it's going to sound a little simple, but it's what I say, and I mean this from my heart. Don't you ever give up. Don't you
Hmm.
ever give up on yourself. You're worth it. And you hang on to that, regardless of what happens, regardless of I'll just what some jerk happens to say,
Great.
regardless of voices that you might hear, the things you might, those doubts you carry around. Don't you ever give up on yourself,
Yeah,
because you're worth it, and you'll do it.
that's right. It's so important, right? It's so much of, especially the world now, where there's so much I mean, there always was this, but comparison to others, and all this social media, and everyone looks like they're living the life of a fantasy world, and right, it's like, and I think that's part of it too sometimes, is to look at inner at yourself. Don't give up on yourself, like you're saying, and the comparison factor, like, don't
It's
get caught
brutal.
up in that, right? Yeah,
Don't
I
get
agree.
caught up.
It's not
You don't. You yourself are of such tremendous value,
exactly.
and to know that, and just, some be kind to yourself,
Yeah,
and being
absolutely.
kind to yourself means believing in yourself.
That's Great advice, great insights. Thank you. Um, let's see here. Commitment to defending children's right is obviously evident in your whole life, your career. Is there a specific case or situation that stands out for you that, you know, made a significant difference? Obviously, you have made lots of differences in lives, but is there a case or a study or not a study, sorry, a case or a situation that you remember that you feel most proud of?
Yeah, well, it's why I wrote a book about it.
There you go.
This
Okay,
dog
sorry.
catcher. You laid it out for me. But it's true. It's where it all started, and it was where one of the most important things was, in this place that was so dark, to gain the trust of particularly one boy who was there, and get him to know that he could trust me, and that I was going to be at his side, and I was going to take him through a trial and being put on a stand and having his whole life laid bare and being examined and being in papers and newspapers and all those sorts of things, and knowing that he trusted that I was going to handle that, and that I was going to be at his side, and that I gave my word that I would always be there. And the truth is, I still know that boy. He's not a boy anymore. He's almost a middle-aged man, but his name is Wayne, and we together, we changed history. We
That's
changed history
amazing.
for hundreds of kids, and it would not have happened but for the courage of that 13-year-old, that little 13-year-old, who showed up to a federal trial, stepped into a mahogany witness box in a Power Rangers t-shirt.
Wow. How
And
scary that must have been for him too. But knowing you were there, I think really, I mean, I can only imagine that that helped ease some of that. But thank you so much for what you do and what you've done for him and what collectively you've done. I can't wait to read your next book and read all the insights of it. So I don't want to give it all away here. We got to make sure people read your book.
I
Um,
appreciate
thinking about foster care overall, and I know it, varies and there's changes that have happened over the years, but what changes or improvements do you believe are the most crucial in the current foster care system? And let's say also if someone wants to get involved and help, how
yeah.
can they get involved?
So, I think there are a lot of ways to get involved. One of my favorites is an organization called CASA, which is Court Appointed Special Advocates.
Okay.
Those are lay folks who are trained. You undergo training, and you are assigned to a child. And then what you do is, as a layperson, it's really valuable, because as a layperson, you're not talking like a lawyer, you're not speaking in this lingo, you're not talking like a social worker who's got all these acronyms that relate to foster care. You're talking like a human being.
Gotcha.
And you go to court, and the judge listens to you. And so you talk about what that child is telling you. And that means a lot. And often you're the only voice for that kid, for that 7-year-old, or that 15-year-old, for that boy or that girl or that transfer. You are the only voice for them, and you're talking, like a human. And that's just an extraordinary. So I'll say it again: CASA,
Okay.
Court Appointed Special Advocates. That's what I really. Those are really great.
Awesome. No, good to know. Also, let's talk a little bit outside of your professional life. What are your interests, activities? What brings you joy? How do you
Yeah.
unwind and recharge outside of the role as a lawyer and an advocate? Just
Well,
curious.
I got to say, first of all, my partner has two boys. They're not my boys, but biologically, but and they're not boys anymore. They're now young men, but I've been in their lives for a good bit, and they bring me an awful lot of joy, occasional frustration, but they're just awesome kids. One is a musician in Nashville now.
Oh, wow.
Um, Yeah, I graduated from Berkeley School of Music.
Oh,
The other just got his first job. He graduated from NAU, Northern Arizona University, and just got a job in software. It took a little bit because things have been really rough in the tech world lately.
yep.
Um, and it was a real joy to sit down with him. And he's gosh, he's probably going to be a little upset with me, but sitting down with him and listening to his interviews and him go through and ask him a question. Well, how'd you answer that? And saying, well, for the next one, maybe answer it this way. And watching him grow that way
Yeah,
and and experience challenges. I mean, it was hard to find a job, and just looking at him and saying, all those times where that interview doesn't work, all of them are just preparation for the one that mattered.
it's
And
great
that's
advice. That is great advice. So true. So
and
true.
and the one that mattered came along. And so he loves this job, and it's good to see him.
That's awesome. And I think there's a puppy in your life too, isn't there?
I do, yes. I am definitely a puppy dog guy. Always had them. I have two puppies. Uh, their names are Waffles and Noodles. My friend sees that for some reason I insist on. I did have another puppy, that another dog that died. His name is Bean. So my friends joke that for some reason I insist on naming my dogs Carbs. So,
I love
um,
that.
but they're really awesome. I swim, and I do go to the gym a lot, and I have some really good friends. So
That's awesome. That's so nice. That's awesome to hear. It's yeah, and just as your sons there went through the whole job things, it's a lot of the listeners on this are going through similar trials and tribulations as it relates to finding jobs, and the market's challenging right now, right? There's a lot of pressure on the market and companies, but um it's your advice to, I think it's always best to keep doing the interviewing and pick yourself up, because you learn something from each of those, and you can also maybe figure out how you stand out a little differently from others. And I think I also say, like, tell your narrative, right? Talk about who you are, not just what you've done or what you do. I think it's important to bring that to the table. So
I think that's really important. I think and that's a hard thing to do from the get go, right?
yeah,
And that's why those first interviews are so important, because you're still learning,
that's right.
just getting the courage, learning how to do that. And I got to say, some people are just it has nothing to do with you. Some people just don't know how to interview. They're just not very good at it,
Oh
and
yeah,
that's not their fault.
that's true.
Um, so just keep going, and pick yourself up. And like I said earlier, don't you give up on yourself.
No,
Don't you do that.
that's great advice. So what's next for you? What are you thinking of? I mean, obviously the book's coming out. You might take a little bit of a pause there, but what else is going on for you? What's next?
Well, so I serve on the Arizona Foster Care Review Board,
Okay.
and what I do with that is I make recommendations to where I look at individual kids. I dig through those big fat files and make recommendations to the juvenile court and to judges and to social workers. Some are great, some are about jobs programs, and some are a little where you got to be a little tough
Yep.
and say, this has to change,
Yeah.
and that means an awful lot. There is a third book in the works, and that one I'm just gonna leave alone. So there is that. So
I guess that's true. Like, once an author, always an author, right?
yeah, well, yeah, it's a wonderful moment. So sometimes it gets a little lonely because you do a lot of time
I've heard that.
sitting,
Yeah.
and uh, I don't know if it's because of law school or whatever, where I just learned to sit in front of that laptop, and maybe I'll sit for 5 or 6 hours, and maybe 2 sentences will come out, but I'll just sit there and then sort of punish myself and say, "You're not getting up, Andy. You're gonna get those 2 sentences."
Not
And
yet.
an English teacher of mine used to joke where she said, she could be a little sarcastic. I loved her, but she'd say, if you write 500 sentences, you're bound to come up with one good one. And so
There you go.
there you go. So
That's awesome. Yeah, you're right about that. I've thought about a book too. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm there yet, but one day hopefully I'll be able to think about that.
I think everybody's got a book. Everybody has got one good book at least.
Okay.
They really do. Every life has a book.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think you're right. Well, first of all, I know we've spent quite a bit of time together, even preparing for this conversation, and it's been incredible to hear about you, your story, the impact you're having. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity in case there's something that I didn't ask you that you would like to share with the listeners of the podcast before we look to close out here today.
I think what I'd say is it's hard sometimes.
Mm.
And I think in many ways, just looking at my partner's boys, in some ways it's harder than it was for me. I think there's a loneliness out there, and a feeling of lack of connection, and good things lie ahead. I promise. Things get better. Good things lie ahead.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I agree with you, and I think that's a good way to end this. But thank you immensely for being a part of this today. And I really appreciate you sharing so openly your story for others to hear. And I wish you all the best on the next book and the following book and the book after that and the book after that. But thank you again for being a part of the Coffee with Convery podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, folks, for the listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network. We're on Spotify. Give us a rating. And you can also follow Coffee with Convery on Instagram to see all of the episodes. This has been Coffee with Convery. And until next time, please stay well.